Zephyr 9 was having another boring day hauling cargo between the outer rim worlds when his ship sensors started beeping. He looked at the screen and saw something floating in space that should not be there. It was small and metal and spinning slowly in the dark between stars. His co-pilot, Vex, made a clicking sound with his mandibles that meant he was worried. The object was an escape pod, but not from any species they knew. Zephyr 9 had been flying cargo runs for 15 years, and he had seen pods from every major species in the galaxy. This one was different. It was built thick and heavy like someone expected it to take a real beating. Most species made their escape pods light and fast, but this one looked like it could crash into a moon and still keep its passenger alive. Vex clicked again and said they should leave it alone. Escape pods in this part of space usually meant trouble. Pirates and slavers and worse things hunted these shipping lanes. Smart pilots minded their own business and kept flying. But something about the pod made Zephyr 9 curious. Maybe it was the way it was built, or maybe it was just his nature. But he told Vex to bring it aboard. The cargo bay was almost empty since they had just delivered a load of rare metals to a mining station. The pod fit inside with room to spare. When they got it secured, Zephyr 9 walked around it looking for markings or symbols. What he found made his blood run cold. The writing was in the angular script of the Death World species, the humans. Everyone in the galaxy knew about humans even, though most had never seen one. They came from a world so dangerous that just living there for a few million years had turned them into something that scared every other species. They were pack hunters who bonded with anything that showed them kindness and would fight to the death to protect what they considered family. Their military was so feared that most conflicts ended when someone just mentioned that humans might get involved. Vex saw the markings too and started making the rapid clicking sounds that meant panic. He said they should space the pod right now and pretend they never found it. Having a human on their ship was like carrying a live bomb. If word got out, every pirate and slaver in 3 sectors would come hunting for them. Humans were worth more than their weight in rare crystals on the black market. But Zephyr 9 could hear something from inside the pod. It was faint, but it sounded like breathing. Whoever was in there was still alive. He found the emergency release, and after a moment of hesitation, he pressed it. The pod hissed open and filled the cargo bay with the smell of blood and burned metal. Inside was a human male who looked young even by their standards. He was unconscious and bleeding from a head wound. His uniform was torn and burned in places. But Zephyr 9 could see rank insignia that meant he was some kind of officer. The human was bigger than most species, but not as big as the stories made them sound. He looked hurt and vulnerable lying there in the damaged pod. Vex was still clicking frantically and saying they should close the pod and forget they ever opened it. But Zephyr 9 was already checking the human for injuries. There was the head wound and some burns on his arms, but nothing that looked fatal. The human needed medical attention, though, and their ship only had basic supplies. The nearest station was Trading Post Nexus 7, which was 3 days away at best speed. It was not the safest place in the galaxy, but it had a medical center that could handle serious injuries. Zephyr 9 made his decision and told Vex to set course for the station. His co-pilot clicked in protest, but started plotting the course anyway. They moved the human to the small medical bay and did what they could with their limited supplies. Zephyr 9 cleaned the head wound and put healing gel on the burns. The human stayed unconscious, but his breathing was steady and strong. Up close, he looked even younger, and Zephyr 9 found himself wondering what had happened to put him alone in an escape pod so far from human space. As they traveled toward the station, Zephyr 9 kept checking on their passenger. On the second day, the human started to stir. His eyes opened slowly, and he looked around the medical bay with confusion. When he saw Zephyr 9 standing there, he tried to sit up too fast and winced in pain. The human said something in his own language first, then switched to Galactic Standard. His voice was hoarse but polite. He said his name was Jake Morrison, and he was a lieutenant in the Earth Defense Force. He thanked Zephyr 9 for rescuing him and asked where they were going. When Zephyr 9 explained about the medical station, Jake nodded and said he was grateful for the help. What surprised Zephyr 9 most was how normal the humans seemed. All the stories made humans sound like barely controlled killers, but Jake was polite and seemed genuinely thankful. He asked if there was anything he could do to help with the ship while he recovered. Most species would just rest and wait to be delivered somewhere safe, but this human wanted to work. By the time they reached trading, post-Nexus 7, Zephyr 9 had learned that humans were not quite what the galaxy believed them to be. Trading post-Nexus 7 was the kind of place where smart people kept their heads down and minded their own business. It hung in space at the crossroads of 3 major shipping lanes and attracted every type of being the galaxy had to offer. Most of them were not the type you wanted to meet in a dark corridor. When Zephyr 9 docked his ship, word spread fast that he had brought something unusual aboard. The medical center was run by a healer named Dr. Kess, who had seen everything in her 40 years of treating spacers and traders. But even she stopped and stared when Zephyr 9 brought Jake into her clinic. She had heard stories about humans but had never expected to see one in person. Jake was polite and patient while she ran her scans and treated his injuries properly. Dr. Kess told them that Jake needed at least 3 days of rest before he should travel again. The head injury was worse than it looked and needed time to heal. She gave Zephyr 9 a room at the station medical wing where Jake could recover. The Kethlari pilot found himself staying close by, even though he could have left his passenger and continued with his cargo runs. During those 3 days, something unexpected happened. Jake and Zephyr 9 started talking and found they enjoyed each other's company. Jake told stories about Earth and what it was like growing up on a world where everything was trying to kill you. He described storms that could level cities and animals that hunted in packs, and oceans full of creatures with teeth longer than most beings were tall. But Jake also talked about Earth's beauty. He told Zephyr 9 about sunsets that painted the sky in colors that had no names and forests so vast you could walk for days without seeing the same tree twice. He described how humans had learned to work together to survive their harsh world and how that cooperation had eventually led them to the stars. Zephyr 9 shared his own stories about growing up on Kethler Prime, where everything was peaceful and ordered. His people were traders and explorers who preferred negotiation to violence. They had joined the galactic community centuries ago and had prospered by being useful to everyone and threatening to no one. It was a good life, but sometimes Zephyr 9 wondered what it would be like to have the kind of passion and intensity that humans were known for. On the second day, Jake asked about Zephyr 9's cargo business and seemed genuinely interested in the details of interstellar trade. He had a quick mind and understood complex economic concepts that most military officers would find boring. Jake explained that his own mission had been diplomatic rather than military. He had been part of a peace delegation traveling to negotiate with a hostile faction when everything went wrong. The ship Jake had been on was called the ESS Horizon, and it was carrying ambassadors and negotiators to a meeting that was supposed to end a small but bitter conflict. The enemy faction had agreed to talks, but it had all been a trap. They ambushed the Horizon in hyperspace and destroyed it with all hands. Jake only survived because he was in the escape pod bay checking safety equipment when the attack happened. The explosion blew him clear of the ship in his pod. Jake's voice got quiet when he talked about the other people on the Horizon. There had been diplomats and doctors and teachers who believed they could make peace instead of war. Good people who died because someone decided that violence was easier than talking. Jake blamed himself for surviving when they did not even, though there was nothing he could have done to save them. Zephyr 9 found himself wanting to comfort the human. This was strange, because his people were not naturally emotional, but something about Jake's pain made him feel protective. He told Jake that surviving when others did not was not something to feel guilty about. Sometimes the galaxy was cruel and unfair, and all anyone could do was try to honor the memory of those who were lost. On the third day, their quiet recovery time was interrupted. A group of Vorthak slavers docked at the station, and word reached them quickly that they were asking questions about a human passenger. The Vorthak were one of the nastier species in the galaxy. They made their living capturing and selling intelligent beings to anyone who would pay. They were strong and brutal, and had no morals that anyone had ever discovered. The leader of the Vorthak group was a scarred veteran named Commander Thex, who had been hunting valuable prizes for 30 years. He had heard about the human on the station and decided that Jake would make an excellent addition to his collection. Humans were rare and valuable, and this one was already injured and isolated, far from any help. Thex found Zephyr 9 and Jake in the medical wing and announced that he was claiming Jake as salvage. Under galactic law, anything found floating in space without clear ownership could be claimed by whoever found it first. Of course, Zephyr 9 had found Jake first, but Thex had more guns and fewer morals. He demanded that the Kethalari hand over his passenger immediately. Jake stood up slowly and told Thex that he would go peacefully if it meant avoiding trouble for Zephyr 9 and the medical staff. This surprised everyone, including Thex, who had expected the famous human warrior to fight. But Jake was thinking about protecting others rather than himself. He did not want innocent people to get hurt because of him. That was when Zephyr 9 surprised himself. He stepped between Jake and the Vorthak slavers and told Thex that the human was under his protection. The words came out before he really thought about what they meant. But as soon as he said them, he knew they were true. Jake had become more than just a passenger. He had become something like a friend. Thex laughed and said that one Kethalari cargo pilot could not stop a team of professional slavers. But Zephyr 9 did not back down. He invoked an ancient galactic law called the right of sanctuary. Any being could claim protection for another, but they became fully responsible for that being's actions. It was a serious legal declaration that most people never used because of the risks involved. The station administrator tried to convince Zephyr 9 to change his mind. Having armed Vorthak slavers angry on his station was bad for business. But Jake looked at the Kethalari pilot with something like wonder in his eyes. No one had ever risked themselves for him before except other humans. The fact that an alien was willing to stand up to dangerous enemies for his sake meant more than Jake could express. Thex decided that if he could not have the human alone, he would take both of them. The situation was about to turn violent when Jake proved that some of the stories about humans were true after all. Commander Thex made his mistake when he grabbed Zephyr 9 by the arm and started dragging him toward the docking bay. Jake moved faster than anyone expected an injured human could move. One moment he was standing quietly behind his friend, and the next moment he had Thex's sidearm in his hand and the safety off. The other Vorthak slavers started reaching for their weapons, but Jake already had them covered. The human's voice was calm and steady when he told them to step back slowly. His eyes had changed from friendly to something cold and dangerous. This was the human warrior that the galaxy feared. But Jake was also careful to position himself so that any shots fired would go away from the civilians in the medical wing. Even in combat mode, he was thinking about protecting innocent people. Thex snarled and called for his backup team, but Jake had already considered that possibility. He told Zephyr 9 to get behind the medical equipment while he covered their retreat to the ship. The Kethalari pilot was amazed at how quickly Jake had taken control of the situation. One moment they were prisoners, and the next moment they were fighting their way to freedom. Dr. Kess and her medical staff scattered as the confrontation moved into the main corridor. Jake kept the Vorthak team pinned down with precise shots that damaged their equipment without killing anyone. He could have easily killed all of them, but he chose not to. Later, Zephyr 9 would realize that this restraint was what separated humans from the truly dangerous species in the galaxy. The running. Battle moved through the station toward the docking bays. Jake used his knowledge of tactics and terrain to keep them ahead of their pursuers. He seemed to know exactly where the Vorthak would try to cut them off and always had a counter move ready. But he was still recovering from his injuries, and Zephyr 9 could see that the fighting was taking a toll on him. Other beings on the station watched the chase with fascination and fear. Most had never seen a human in combat before. Jake moved with a fluid grace that made violence look like a deadly dance. But what impressed the watchers most was how he constantly checked to make sure no bystanders were in danger. Even while fighting for his life, he cared about protecting strangers. They reached Zephyr 9's ship just as Thex's reinforcements arrived. 6 more Vorthak warriors with heavy weapons were moving to surround the docking bay. Jake assessed the situation in seconds and told Zephyr 9 to start the engines while he held them off. The Kethalari pilot wanted to argue, but Jake was already moving to a defensive position. What happened next became a story that spread across the galaxy. Jake fought a rear guard action against overwhelming odds while protecting both his friend and the civilian dock workers. He used the cargo containers and loading equipment as cover while picking off the Vorthak attackers with surgical precision. Every shot he fired hit exactly where he aimed it and nowhere else. But it was not just Jake's skill with weapons that impressed the witnesses. It was his tactical thinking and his moral code. He disabled rather than killed when possible. He warned civilians to take cover before engaging the enemy. He took unnecessary risks to avoid collateral damage. This was not the mindless killer that galactic propaganda described. This was a warrior with principles. Zephyr 9 got their ship powered up and opened the cargo bay doors. Jake fell back toward the ship while still engaging the enemy. He was limping now and bleeding from a new wound on his shoulder, but he did not stop fighting. The Vorthak were getting frustrated because their superior numbers and firepower were not helping them against an opponent who seemed to predict their every move. The escape almost failed when Thex himself appeared with a plasma cannon that could punch through their ship's hull. Jake saw the danger and threw himself at the Vorthak commander just as the weapon fired. The shot went wide and burned a hole in the station wall instead of destroying their engines. Jake and Thex rolled across the deck in hand-to-hand combat. Zephyr 9 had never seen anything like the fight between Jake and Thex. The human was injured and smaller than his opponent, but he fought with a savage intelligence that overcame the Vorthak's advantages. Jake used leverage and technique to throw the bigger alien across the docking bay. When Thex tried to get up, Jake was already there to put him down again. The rest of the Vorthak team hesitated when they saw their leader defeated so quickly. That hesitation gave Zephyr 9 the chance to bring his ship's defensive weapons online. The cargo vessel was not a warship, but it had enough firepower to make the slavers think twice about continuing the fight. Jake limped aboard as the ship lifted off and left the station behind. As they cleared the station's mass, Zephyr 9 realized that their troubles were just beginning. The fight had been broadcast live across the station's internal network, and recordings were already spreading to other systems. Everyone in the galaxy would soon know that a Kethalari freighter pilot had claimed sanctuary for a human and fought slavers to protect him. Jake collapsed in the medical bay as soon as they were safe. His injuries had reopened during the fight, and he needed immediate treatment. But as Zephyr 9 worked to stabilize his friend, he could not stop thinking about what he had witnessed. Jake had fought like the legendary human warriors, but he had also shown mercy and restraint that most species would consider weakness. The communication system started receiving messages before they even reached hyperspace. Some were threats from Vorthak allies demanding they return their prisoner. Others were offers from various factions who wanted to buy or trade for the human. A few were expressions of support from beings who had been impressed by Jake's conduct during the fight. Zephyr 9 deleted all the messages without responding. He was beginning to understand that by claiming sanctuary for Jake, he had committed himself to a path that would change both their lives forever. The galaxy would not forget what had happened at Trading Post Nexus 7, and neither would the enemies they had made. But as he watched Jake sleeping in the medical bay, Zephyr 9 knew he had made the right choice. The human had risked everything to protect him and innocent civilians during the fight. That kind of selfless courage was rare in the galaxy and worth protecting, even if it meant they would spend the rest of their lives running from enemies who would never stop hunting them. The ship jumped to hyperspace carrying two fugitives who had discovered that friendship could be stronger than fear, and that doing the right thing was sometimes more important than staying safe. The news of what happened at Trading Post Nexus 7 spread through the galaxy faster than Zephyr 9 had thought possible. Within hours of their escape, bounty hunters and faction ships were launching from a dozen different systems. The Vorthax Syndicate had put a price on their heads that would make whoever captured them rich beyond imagination. But it was not just about money anymore. It was about honor and reputation, and the fact that a single human had made fools of professional slavers. Zephyr 9's cargo ship Dawn's Edge was not built for running from military vessels. It was designed to haul freight between peaceful systems and had only basic defensive systems. Jake worked frantically in the engineering section, trying to upgrade their weapons and shields using human engineering principles. He explained that human ships were built to take damage and keep fighting, while most alien vessels relied on speed and maneuverability to avoid trouble altogether. The first pursuit came 3 days after they left the station. A Vorthak hunter ship found them refueling at an automated depot in an empty system. The enemy vessel was twice their size and armed with military-grade weapons. Jake took control of their defensive systems, while Zephyr 9 handled the piloting. The battle was brief and desperate, with the Dawn's Edge using the fuel depot's structure as cover, while Jake tried to find weak points in the hunter ship's defenses. What saved them was Jake's knowledge of Vorthak ship design. He had studied enemy vessels during his military training and knew that their main engines had vulnerable cooling systems. A few precise shots from their upgraded weapons disabled the hunter ship long enough for them to escape. But Jake warned Zephyr 9 that the next pursuit would be larger and better prepared. They were right to be worried. Within a week, 3 different factions had ships hunting for them. The Vorthak wanted revenge for the insult to their reputation. The Hegemony Intelligence Service wanted to capture a live human for interrogation about Earth's military capabilities. A consortium of black market dealers saw an opportunity to acquire the most valuable slave in the galaxy. Jake tried repeatedly to contact Earth for extraction, but the responses he received were not encouraging. Earth's military command acknowledged his situation, but explained that they could not risk open conflict with multiple alien factions over one officer. They advised him to surrender to proper authorities and trust that diplomatic channels would secure his release. Jake listened to their messages with growing anger and finally sent back a response that ended his military career. He told Earth Command that he would not abandon someone who had risked everything to save him. He said that if Earth was not willing to protect beings who showed courage and honor, then maybe Earth did not deserve to be protected either. The transmission was intercepted by their pursuers and added another layer of complexity to their situation. Now everyone knew that Earth had officially abandoned Jake Morrison, but not everyone in the galaxy saw them as criminals. On a mining world called Kepler Station, they received an encrypted message from the colony administrator offering safe harbor. The administrator was a former refugee who had heard the story of how Jake protected civilians during the station fight. She said that anyone willing to risk their life for strangers deserved help when they needed it. The offer turned out to be a trap set by bounty hunters who had tortured the real administrator for her access codes. Jake and Zephyr 9 barely escaped when their ship's sensors detected the hunter fleet waiting in ambush. The close call taught them that they could not trust anyone who offered help through official channels. Their luck finally ran out near the Outer Rim territories when a coordinated pursuit by 5 different hunter groups forced them into a damaged system with unstable hyperspace routes. The Dawn's Edge was running low on fuel and supplies, and Jake's jury-rigged improvements were beginning to fail under constant use. They managed to reach a small mining planet called Kepler 442c, but their ship was too damaged to continue running. The mining colony on Kepler 442c was one of those places where beings came to disappear from their past lives. Most of the miners were refugees or outcasts from a dozen different species who worked the dangerous deep mines because it paid better than anything else they could find. The colony administrator was an elderly Dalaxian named Korath, who had seen enough trouble in his long life to recognize it when it landed on his doorstep. Jake insisted that they should surrender rather than bring danger to the mining colony. The miners were innocent civilians who did not deserve to be caught up in their problems. But Korath and his people had heard the complete story of what happened at Trading Post Nexus 7. They knew that Jake had risked his life to protect strangers and that Zephyr 9 had stood up to dangerous enemies for the sake of friendship. The miners held a quick vote and decided unanimously to invoke the right of sanctuary for both fugitives. Korath explained that most of them were running from something in their past, and they understood what it meant to need help from strangers. They would not turn away beings who had shown the same courage that had helped many of them escape their own troubles. Jake tried to explain that the pursuit ships would arrive soon, and that the colony would be defenseless against military weapons. But Korath just smiled and pointed out that humans were supposed to be good at organizing defenses. If Jake was half as skilled as the stories claimed, then maybe he could teach them how to protect themselves. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity as Jake organized the mining colony's defenses. He used his knowledge of tactics and engineering to turn civilian equipment into defensive positions. Mining explosives became improvised mines. Heavy excavation equipment was converted into mobile weapons platforms. The colony's communication array was modified to jam enemy sensors and targeting systems. But most importantly, Jake taught the miners how to work together as a coordinated defense force. He showed them how to use the terrain to their advantage, and how to make attacking forces pay a high price for every meter of ground. The miners were surprised to discover that they enjoyed working together toward a common goal instead of just competing for the best mining claims. When the hunter fleets finally arrived, they found something they had not expected. Instead of two helpless fugitives hiding among defenseless civilians, they discovered a well-organized defensive position manned by motivated volunteers. The miners had decided that protecting Jake and Zephyr 9 was worth fighting for, because these strangers had shown them what real courage looked like. The siege of Kepler 442c was about to begin, and the galaxy was watching to see what would happen when human determination met overwhelming odds. The hunter fleets that gathered around Kepler 442c were the largest combined force that most beings had ever seen in one place. 12 ships from different factions had put aside their usual rivalries to claim the prize that Jake Morrison represented. The Vorthax Syndicate wanted revenge. The Hegemony wanted intelligence. The black market dealers wanted profit. But they all wanted the same thing and were willing to work together to get it. Jake stood in the colony's command center watching the enemy ships position themselves for attack and felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. Hundreds of innocent miners were about to die because he had refused to surrender. Zephyr 9 tried to tell him that the miners had made their own choice, but Jake could not escape the feeling that he was responsible for what was about to happen. Commander Thex's voice came over the communication system offering terms for surrender. He promised that only Jake and Zephyr 9 would be taken, and that the miners would be left alone if they handed over the fugitives immediately. Jake started to respond, but Korath pushed him away from the transmitter and told Thex exactly what the miners thought of his offer using language that would have made a Vorthak blush. The siege began with orbital bombardment of the colony's defensive positions. Jake had positioned the defenders in hardened mining tunnels and reinforced equipment shelters that could withstand the initial assault. The miners used their knowledge of the underground tunnel system to move between positions without being detected by the enemy's sensors. Jake's tactical planning proved its worth during the first day of fighting. The attackers expected to face frightened civilians, but instead encountered coordinated resistance that made them pay for every attack. The miners used mining charges to collapse tunnel entrances behind advancing enemy troops. They employed heavy excavation equipment to create mobile strongpoints that could relocate before enemy artillery could target them. But what impressed the attackers most was the discipline and coordination of the defense. Jake had taught the miners to fight as a unit rather than as individuals. They covered each other's retreat when positions became untenable. They shared ammunition and medical supplies without being ordered to do so. They risked their lives to rescue wounded comrades, even when it meant exposing themselves to enemy fire. The story of the miners' resistance spread across galactic networks faster than the military situation reports. Beings throughout the galaxy watched live feeds of ordinary civilians standing up to professional military forces. They saw Jake Morrison organizing defenses that protected innocent people while following strict rules of engagement that minimized casualties on both sides. On the third day of the siege, something unexpected happened. A supply ship approached the system flying the colors of the Neutral Commerce Guild. The captain announced that he was delivering medical supplies and food to the mining colony under the ancient laws of humanitarian assistance. The hunter fleets tried to turn him away, but the captain pointed out that interfering with humanitarian aid was considered a war crime under galactic law. The supply ship was followed by others. Medical volunteers from a dozen different species arrived to treat wounded miners. News reporters came to document the siege. Even some military observers appeared claiming they were studying human tactical methods for educational purposes. The isolated mining colony suddenly became the center of galactic attention. Jake realized that their desperate stand was inspiring others throughout the galaxy. Beings who had never heard of humans before were watching how Jake organized the defense. While caring for civilian casualties, they saw him risk his life to protect beings who were not even his own species. They witnessed human tactical thinking combined with human moral principles and found something worth admiring. The siege reached its crisis point when the hunter fleets decided to end the standoff with a massive assault. They had grown tired of being humiliated by miners and were ready to accept heavy casualties to claim their prize. Jake knew that the colony's defenses could not withstand a coordinated attack by all 12 enemy ships working together. That night, Jake made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He announced that he was going to surrender to prevent further bloodshed. The miners had done enough for him and Zephyr 9, and he would not let them sacrifice their lives for strangers. Korath and the other miners tried to talk him out of it, but Jake's mind was made up. Zephyr 9 found Jake preparing for surrender in the colony's communication center. The Kethlari pilot told his friend that if Jake was determined to give himself up, then Zephyr 9 would surrender too. They had started this journey together, and they would finish it together. Jake tried to argue that there was no reason for both of them to be captured, but Zephyr 9 reminded him that humans were not the only species capable of loyalty. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent message from the colony's sensor station. A massive fleet had just arrived at the edge of the system and was moving toward the planet at high speed. The sensor operator could not identify the ships, but they were larger and more advanced than anything in the hunter fleets. Jake felt his heart sink as he realized that even more enemies had arrived to claim him. But when the new fleet opened communication channels, the voice that came through was speaking English with an Earth accent. Admiral Lisa Carter of the Earth Defense Force announced her presence and demanded that all hostile ships withdraw from the system immediately. She explained that Earth had come to collect something that belonged to them. The galaxy held its breath as 24 Earth warships took positions around Kepler 442c. These were not the exploration vessels that most aliens had heard about in stories. These were purpose-built instruments of war that had been designed by the species that had fought its way to the top of the most dangerous world in the galaxy. The hunter fleets suddenly looked small and obsolete by comparison. Admiral Carter's next transmission was directed at Jake personally. She told him that Earth had been monitoring the situation and preparing for this moment. His message rejecting Earth's earlier advice had been exactly what they hoped to hear. They had not abandoned him. They had been waiting for him to prove that humans would stand by their friends even when it cost them everything. The hunter fleets found themselves facing a choice between retreat and destruction. Earth's ships were clearly superior in every way that mattered. But more importantly, Earth had not come alone. The supply ships and medical vessels and news reporters had been followed by military observers from species throughout the galaxy. Everyone was watching to see what Earth would do with its overwhelming advantage. What happened next would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Admiral Lisa Carter stood on the bridge of the EDS Valkyrie, watching the Hunter fleets scramble to reorganize their formations. 24 Earth warships had just demonstrated the kind of tactical coordination that made human military doctrine famous throughout the galaxy. They had emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation and taken control of the system in minutes. Now, 12 different faction commanders were trying to decide whether to fight or flee. The Admiral opened a general communication channel that reached every ship in the system. Her voice was calm and professional when she explained Earth's position. The mining colony on Kepler 442c was now under Earth's protection. Any ship that wished to leave the system peacefully would be allowed to do so. Any ship that chose to remain would be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly. Commander Thex of the Vorthak Syndicate was the first to respond. He claimed that Earth had no legal authority in this system, and that the fugitives belonged to whoever was strong enough to take them. His threats were interrupted when the Valkyrie's targeting systems locked onto his ship, and Admiral Carter politely asked if he would like to test Earth's resolve. The Hegemony Intelligence Service tried a different approach. Their commander pointed out that Earth was risking war with multiple factions over a single officer who had already been disavowed by his own government. Admiral Carter smiled and explained that Earth's earlier response had been carefully calculated misdirection. They had been monitoring the situation from the beginning and preparing for this exact moment. Jake Morrison listened to the exchange from the mining colony's command center with growing amazement. Earth had not abandoned him after all. They had been testing him to see if he would uphold human values, even when it cost him everything. His willingness to sacrifice his career and his freedom to protect Zephyr 9 and the miners had proven that he understood what it meant to be human. Admiral Carter's next announcement sent shockwaves through the galactic community. Earth was formally establishing a new principle in interstellar law called the right of chosen family. Any being who risked their life to save a human would be considered family by Earth and would receive all the protection that implied. The miners of Kepler 442c had earned that protection by standing with Jake and Zephyr 9 against overwhelming odds. The Hunter fleets found themselves facing an impossible situation. Earth's ships were clearly superior in firepower and technology. But more importantly, Earth had the moral authority that came from defending those who had shown courage and honor. The galaxy was watching, and most beings agreed that the miners deserved protection for their brave stand. The Vorthak Syndicate made the mistake of trying to call Earth's bluff. Thex ordered his ships to attack the mining colony despite the presence of Earth's fleet. What happened next became a textbook example of why humans were feared throughout the galaxy. The Earth ships moved with precision and coordination that made the Hunter fleets look like amateurs by comparison. The battle lasted exactly 17 minutes. Earth's weapons were designed to disable rather than destroy when possible, but they were devastatingly effective. The Vorthak ships found their engines offline and their weapon systems neutralized before they could fire a single shot. The other Hunter fleets watched in stunned silence as 12 Vorthak vessels were reduced to helpless hulks drifting in space. But what impressed the galaxy most was Earth's restraint. Admiral Carter could have destroyed the Vorthak fleet completely, but instead she offered surrender terms that were surprisingly generous. Crews would be rescued and repatriated. Ships would be returned after being searched for evidence of slave trading. Only Commander Thex and his senior officers would face trial for their crimes. The remaining Hunter fleets decided that discretion was the better part of valor and requested permission to leave the system. Admiral Carter granted their requests with the understanding that Earth would remember who had participated in the hunt and who had chosen to withdraw when given the chance. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Jake and Zephyr 9 were transported to the Valkyrie where they met Admiral Carter in person. She was a veteran officer who had spent 30 years defending Earth's interests, but she seemed genuinely moved by their story. She told them that Earth had been looking for an opportunity to establish better relations with the galactic community, and their friendship had provided the perfect catalyst. The mining colony became the first joint human-alien settlement under Earth's protection. Korath was appointed as the civilian administrator while Earth provided military defense and technological assistance. The miners discovered that human engineering techniques could make their operations more efficient and profitable, while Earth gained access to rare minerals that were essential for their advanced technology. Zephyr 9 found himself in the unique position of being the first alien to receive formal Earth citizenship. Admiral Carter explained that his courage in standing up to the Vorthak slavers had earned him a place in human society if he wanted it. But more importantly, Earth was offering him the position of first alien ambassador with the mission of finding other species who shared human values of courage and loyalty. Jake's military career was officially reinstated with a promotion and a new assignment. He would work with Zephyr 9 to establish diplomatic relations with species who had been impressed by the events at Kepler 442c. Their friendship had accidentally created a new model for interspecies cooperation based on mutual respect rather than fear or exploitation. The story of Jake Morrison and Zephyr 9 spread throughout the galaxy as an example of what was possible when beings chose to do the right thing regardless of the consequences. Their rescue of each other had evolved into Earth's rescue of everyone who believed that friendship was stronger than prejudice and that courage was more valuable than safety. Admiral Carter's final announcement established Earth's new policy toward the galactic community. Humans were no longer interested in isolation and were actively seeking diplomatic and cultural exchange with any species willing to treat them as equals rather than curiosities or threats. The age of human isolation was ending not through conquest or intimidation, but through the simple power of friendship. Jake and Zephyr 9 stood together on the bridge of their new ship, watching the stars wheel by as they prepared for their first diplomatic mission. The ship was a joint human Kethalari design that combined the best features of both technologies. Zephyr 9 joked that next time he would think twice before rescuing mysterious aliens, but both of them knew he would make the same choice again. Their friendship had accidentally started a war, but it had ended with something much more valuable. They had shown the galaxy that different species could work together as family, and that doing the right thing was always worth the risk. The universe was a little less dark because two strangers had chosen to trust each other when it mattered most.